Thank you, Peter. And it's fabulous to be here amongst colleagues yet again. Just the rich conversations that we're having today, it's always great to have an opportunity to share best practice and glean some ideas from other sites around what's working well and how you can potentially change things within your own sites. So thank you for having us today, and we'll kick off. So the purpose of the session that we are running today is around making a difference, and that's quite broad. So we can make a difference in a number of ways. So the purpose of the session today, we're going to be looking at identifying which students we are making a difference for when we use that term around students with functional needs. We'll identify what making a difference actually looks like in learning outcomes for this cohort. And we will also be looking at providing an overview of the disability policy and support framework within which we are currently operating and the current reforms that are emerging from this space. We will also be looking at informing how EYCD supports you to do this work within that current framework and where we're going towards in the future. And then also providing some useful examples that probably culminate a range of what we've talked about today. So there may be some overlapping of themes, but it's around bringing all of this together to demonstrate how we're making an impact for students with functional needs. So the first slide I've got here is looking at the data profile, which is quite interesting. So if we return back to we've got 3 out of 10 students starting school developmentally at risk. So the early years announcement is quite a good one in terms of us having, that data set around knowing where kids are at so that we can actually inform planning and make adjustments early on in their learning journey. The 31% of students being recorded in NCCD as requiring an adjustment. And the disability data then extends from there because we've also got kids that we are recording via census which are not captured which are captured in the NCCD, but we have our EdSAS head count, which looks at, we've got around 12% of the population being recorded there. If we look at the cohort in NCCD that's being provided with supplementary adjustments and adjustments at that QDTP level, it's really high. We've got 78% of the cohort. And if we actually correlate that back to IESP, we've got around 82% of students being allocated categories 1 to 3. Via that program. So you can see the bulk of our cohort is actually sitting in that QDTP supplementary level. So really important, as we've explored today, to get those whole of site practices going and those interventions, and at that wave 2 level having that translation back to teacher practice in the classroom at that whole of class level. We've also got 83% of our students in mainstream and the majority have autism. The top 3 disability need areas are autism, language and complex social emotional. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is a dramatic shift in what it previously looked like under the disability support program versus what it looks like now. So we had a profile of mainly language, intellectual and autism, and we've had that shift towards complex social emotional and the categories there. And interestingly, under the previous model to the new model, we've had a 604% increase in students identified in that complex social emotional group. So, and we've heard from leaders today talking about how important it is to get the interventions right for that cohort because kids don't always have that open brain. So in order to get that boost in your literacy and numeracy that we're all seeking, and that's one of the main measures that we have, great focus also needs to occur in terms of those interventions for kids with functional needs in that particular area. If we look at that last dot point there around the 3 times more likely to be suspended, excluded and receive take-homes, that's a pretty sobering dot point if you think about it. And if any of you have connected with the C review, that was undertaken by Linda Graham. Encourage you to have a look at that because, it actually brings back that focus to why we're all here. We're here for all kids and making a difference. If we look at learning outcomes, this comes back to the, are we making an impact? How long's a piece of string? Impact can be measured in different ways, but the current ways that we're currently doing this, again, looking at those sobering dot points there, which are 50% are exempt from NAPLAN. So how are we measuring growth for kids that are not sitting standardised tests? So it poses some questions. 25% do not have running records, phonics, PAT records. So again, how are we actually measuring growth? What data and assessments are we using to inform planning for those kids? The Wellbeing survey, you can see there, the majority of the percentage of kids that are tapping into that survey as compared to other students. And if we look at the retention rates in secondary, again, we've got from year 10 to year 12, we've got poorer retention rates for our students with functional needs. And then if we look at, in terms of an IESP perspective, we've got around 0.2% of IESP review students coming through that are asking for a decrease. And that's not to, we know that a lot of our kids with functional needs need that support on a continuous basis because of the nature of their needs. But we would be expecting a large majority of kids, particularly some in the social emotional that don't have the trauma background, that we would be making some skill development gains towards independence. So we are really working hard as a system to try and get that skill development focus in terms of support that we're wrapping around kids with those needs. I won't spend too much time on this one, but it's really to just acknowledge the journey that we've been on. And Di talked a little bit around this earlier. The priority for us at the moment is around improving outcomes for the 1 in 4, and we know if we improve the outcomes for the 1 in 4, we're actually lifting the system. So the policy and support framework within which we currently operate is the one that you can see on the screen. And, I'm standing here today, I'm extremely proud that as a jurisdiction, we've been on this long journey and you can see that the landscape has changed dramatically in those last 6 years. And I'm really proud that we've been leading the nation in this particular area. So, and that's because of all of you. You have all led this change, which is absolutely fabulous. And other states and jurisdictions are looking to us for guidance around how our journey has been. The IESP and the One Plan have been significantly transformational, whether, yes, we acknowledge that not all of it has been perfect, but the learnings that we're gaining from actually going down this path have been amazing. And that's put us on this path to reform that we're currently engaged in now. So I thank you for putting us on the new pathway and direction that we're going, because without you, we can't inform the next iterations of where we're going. Since we've implemented those major reforms, we've obviously been throughout that time connecting with leaders and educators, doing lots of site visits, getting and receiving lots of feedback. We've recently held our 16 workshops to glean further feedback and input from leaders around, how these reforms have been going and what would make a difference going forward. And so we are looking to co-design over the next 2 to 3 years some large pieces of work around reforms in this space, which is really exciting. And as I said, we wouldn't be in this position had we not gone down the path of functional needs and looking at students instead of looking at their disability label and diagnosis. What we have gleaned from the feedback, the main salient points in terms of pain points for the system have been acknowledged around increasing complexity and the difficulties associated with meeting the needs, especially when there's a large density or where you might have a low leadership density within your site. We've also got issues around accessing expertise, because we know that functional needs. This is a new area that we're all playing in, so accessing that expertise to actually identify the needs, plan for them, test and hypothesise and put in place the interventions that meet the need. We have differing language and practices going on. I think with all the site visits that have been undertaken in the last 18 months, we see lots of reinventing of the wheel. So how do we do that better from the centre and provide guidance around, hey, this is working well in a secondary sense. This is what, and in this particular context. Noting that, I think the biggest thing that we've learned is that everything needs to be differentiated and nuanced because you do have different complexities, and that ranges from Cat 1 to 7. And so how do we navigate that space and provide support and resourcing to meet those needs? Caroline touched a little bit on it this morning around, so what it's led us to is to the 1 in 4 reforms, which we are now driving, which are a culmination of all that feedback that we received. And we are looking at those 4 key areas, which are around improving practice guidance for teachers and leaders and other educators, and really thinking about how we can deliver that in a model coach approach, because we know from the literacy guarantee experience that has been highly successful, and it's a consistent theme that is provided when we engage with sites. How can we improve the provision of funding? Again, reiterating that we've got 82% of our kids sitting in that supplementary cohort. So how can we do that better and pick up those nuances in terms of, what are the things that set sites apart and how can we actually cater for that from a service and a resourcing viewpoint? We are currently recruiting 2 senior advisors to assist with the planning in Category 1 and 2 schools, and one of the key elements will be around, some of the themes we've heard today is around how do we step through that process of going on the journey, how do we document the nuances within our site, how do we resource it, how do we track, plan and adjust. So that will be a key focus of the work of that team so that we can provide some tools and guidance that we will be able to facilitate with schools, not make schools do, but facilitate for schools to assist with this space. And we will also be looking at developing some videos around best practice and placing those on the intranet page so that, like today, we've heard some wonderful examples of great practice so that you can tap into those and take what you need. I think that's the big learner, is that no site's the same. So you're going to pull from other sites depending on what's going to meet the needs for your context. So how is EYCD best supporting interventions via the existing policy and support framework? We know that research suggests that Wave 3 cohort should be around our 4 to 5%. Our data's currently got students, around 8% of students in that cohort, which is quite large. So what that does suggest is that an improved focus and practice guidance around how are we catering for students at the Wave 1 and 2 levels. So highly important. A common and useful planning model that we often talk about, and there are different variations and we've heard different approaches to that today, is around the waves of intervention. And so what I have done today is put together just a couple of key features that we see that are successful when implementing the waves of intervention across the site. So if we look at, and obviously it's got to reflect your local context, so it's not going to be the same always as the site down the road, but what we do know is that in terms of establishing those whole site planning management systems, hugely important. The same with establishing a student review team or an intervention team that can actually drive decision making for your particular site. Building site and class learner profiles, again, not easy to do. And I think the examples today have shown that you use the information and data sets available to you. It's triangulated data. Create your own data sets. Whatever's going to give you the most amount of information to target the needs for your site is where we need to be driving the bus. High investment in your paraprofessionals and your teachers' professional development, consistent theme that we've heard today. And also, one of the things that we often explore with sites when we are talking around Wave 1 and 2 is the identification of those data cut points. So what's the tipping point? Once you've identified what your need areas are, what are the tipping points for moving kids through those waves? Are they clearly identified? Do staff know what they are? Who's the team? Is it the SRT that the staff go to when they are thinking about having to look at a child going into those interventions? Having those processes in place really assist with your planning. And our national projects team in DPP and student support services can help with both of those things around establishing those processes. So I highly encourage you to tap into those if you haven't already. Building, and the last one is around continually adjusting practice according to, your review of how that's going. And that's not something that I need to teach you about because, but the assess, plan, teach, track, adjust cycle must be in place for everybody. One of the other things that I'll quickly share just around in terms of thinking, how are you at a partnership level sharing best practice? Do you have PLCs in place? Do you have those in place within your own site? There would be people within your own sites that may be experts in some of the areas that you're talking about. So explore those within your leadership teams and groups to get that working for your particular partnership and your sites. Wave 2, sorry, I keep forgetting that that's in front of me. Wave 2 key features. You're increasing that personalisation for individuals at that Wave 2 level. Really important, as I said before, that it ties back to Wave 1 and knowing those data cut points for kids going between the waves. And that we are also looking at reviewing goal achievement, particularly the micro goals. So you might not have these large set goals, but it's around the micro goals in terms of, are we making a difference at that particular level? Wave 3 level, that was my 1 minute, wasn't it? Wave 3 again, you're just getting the increased personalisation at that Wave 3 level. And it's really having the backstory, the data backstory to demonstrate what you've been doing in Wave 1 and 2 has not worked, we're not making gains, it's now time that we need to be looking at that Wave 3 intervention. This is where you really would be gleaning from your specialist staff to know what the needs are and hypothesising, testing, trialling, recording and providing that information as part of your planning. And having the regular and fortnightly, weekly check-ins, could be even daily for some kids that are really high needs. Key takeaways just quickly are around, the whole site planning and making those processes well understood, knowing your budget, talking with your staff around how you're utilising your budget. How are you using that at a partnership level? If you're looking at your data at a partnership level, are there common themes that you need to be then possibly thinking about? How can we use this in a better way? Could we be employing teachers if we've all got similar profiles and similar needs to do specific work? Your data gives you the roadmap. My last one, which I'll squeeze in with the blessing of my colleagues here. Thinking about beyond what is. One of my colleagues who was previously in DPP, who's a brilliant educator in terms of differentiation, well known in the department, Julia Goldsworthy, sent me this clip, and please do get on YouTube and view it. It's wonderfully uplifting and should really resonate with you all. And it talks about how classrooms are the cockpits to our economy. Absolutely. That every student has a jagged profile. And it's, how do we cater for that jagged profile? Not one specific program, how do we design if we design for the average, we don't meet the needs of anyone. Not one specific program or intervention will meet the needs of all students. And you see that with your literacy and numeracy and where you need to splinter off and actually provide a wave 3. EYCD has that systematic role in supporting you to do this work, to cater for the jagged profile. And to finish, I'll want to leave you with a final thought before I hand over to Heidi. The kids that we're talking about today are primarily in that long tail of underachievement that Jeff Masters talks about. And so the potential for this cohort to lift the entire system it cannot be understated. It's huge. And so if in our reach towards and our searching towards continuous improvement to achieve our world-class ambition, if the strategies that assist the 1 in 4, they actually assist the 4 and 4. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindley. Thanks, Rachel. She's taking my photo. So I'm Heidi Roerig. I'm Deputy Principal at Linden Park Primary School. We are a very large primary school in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide, so we are quite different to some of the other schools that have been presented in here today. So we've got 120 students in each of our year levels, reception to year 7. So in the junior primary, that's 5 classes per year level and 4 in the primary. We only have 6% of our cohort on school card. 79%, however, though, are from a non-English speaking background, and 66% of our students receive EALD support from our 2.57 FTE yield staff. We also have 13 hours of BSSO funding for Mandarin speaking students and also 3 hours for those that speak Farsi. So that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of our demographics. We've got 90 staff, 66 part-time and full-time teachers, including our leadership and support staff. We have, so that makes supporting our 35 classes. We've got 25 SSOs, and that's made up of administration and classroom support people. So we are a big site, and with big sites come big complexities, I suppose, although different to other schools. So one of the approaches we use to manage that is our team approach. So we have year level teams or cohort teams, and they all have team leaders. So if I refer to the year level teams, that's the structure that we use to support our communication, to support our change initiatives, and to support our site improvement planning. And I'll just throw in there too that, I mean, we were looking at our ICSE graphs and they're pretty much flipped. So you can imagine ours is 1,154 and we're in the 94th percentile. So we are a high achieving school, but with that and being a leafy green comes, its own set of complexities. So our families are very much driven by academic success, and with that comes students who have lack of social skills, lack of emotional awareness, lack of language development. They come to school not being able to hold a pair of scissors or being able to kick a ball because the focus is on academics. We've got the tiger parents where there is so much emphasis put on academic achievement that our children are highly stressed, highly anxious. In fact, most of our mandatory notifications come from violence in the home towards children who have not achieved their academic goals. So it's a real different set of circumstances, I suppose, to some schools. We also struggle with the fact that culturally lots of our families do not want their child to be diagnosed, or they do not want to disclose any information about any diagnoses that their children have. And that's fear of alienation within the community, and that's something that we work with on a daily basis as well. And our WEC data reflects all that too. So we do, our children have low emotional regulation, low satisfaction with life, and worries. They're the sort of the big areas that come out of our WEC. So training for our staff's really important around being trauma aware. Smart training, we've been sending staff to Berry Street for the last couple of years as well. We've even had Madhavina Parker come in a few weeks ago to train teachers, SSOs and our OSH staff as well around what's the buzz. And we really try and instill the professional learning into our SSOs because they are key to a lot of this. So, excuse me, our portfolio run termly SSO PDs. In fact, it's across a couple of portfolios. And we also have a PD application process. We've got a budget set aside for inclusion PD, so any staff member can apply through that to go to PD, particularly if it relates to their work. So, oh, sorry, I was talking about all that and didn't even have the slide up. So that's just a snapshot of us. So knowing our learners. So I guess the most important thing for us is that, as you'd know, through the work of Carol Ann Tomlinson and that sort of thing, if you're going to differentiate for children and help them to achieve success, we really need to know what they can know and what they can do. And because of our context, I guess our wave 1 and wave 2 approaches will look quite different to other schools. So I thought I might start off by just talking a bit about what that looks like for us at Linden Park. So getting to know our learners, one of the things that we've started this year, thanks to Rachel Pontifex, who's our Student Wellbeing Leader on Table 8, shout out to you. So she has started Seek Week. It's a social, emotional, education and kindness week, and she's developed with our Student Action Committee, and that is around getting to know you. It's around child protection curriculum, social skills and emotional literacy. And this year we've just trialled it off in the first week of term 1, but Rachel's already got plans to expand that for next year so that it becomes a more consistent approach throughout the year in each classroom. Very important aspect of, because we are an IB school, is around activating students' prior knowledge. So there is a large focus on teachers finding out what do children already know and using provocations such as books and excursions and artefacts. You know, they'll bring in things like an old washboard and kids have to figure out what it is. And it generates questions, sparks interest and starts their thinking, and teachers can already start to gauge what it is that kids know and what they need to learn next. Another Carol Ann Tomlinson thing is the KWL charts. So what I know, what I want to know, and then afterwards, what is it that I learnt? You know, brainstorming, that sort of thing. And like we heard from Para Hills before, we do invest in additional resources. So one I've just flicked up there is TILS. That's one that we've purchased recently. It's the Test of Integrated Language and Literacy Skills. And we use that one for any students that we think are struggling with their language or literacy or communication skills, and it gives you a complete profile of their oral language and written skills. It helps us to identify any focus areas for intervention or teaching points for that child. It also helps us to provide additional information to support services if we're doing a referral or if we're doing an ISP application as well. And moderation as well. I mean, all schools are doing moderation, but I guess for us, one of the things is that because of our high achievement, our teachers are often aiming too high. So, you know, we sort of need to get a bit of perspective on that and make sure that we are supporting students at where they should be. Lindley talked before about the importance of using data to inform what we do. So we have got assessment maps that we have across the schools. This one here I've got up is just our literacy one, and it's just a snapshot just to give you an idea, but I can always share this through the platform that we've got available. So this one here has been created by our literacy coach, Alice Probin. We use all these assessments to obviously track and monitor, ensure that our students are achieving growth. To inform our planning, next steps in learning. What intervention does the child need? Is the intervention working? Do we need to look at doing a referral? You know, what are the next steps for that child? Our staff also, so all of our teaching staff have 2 half days where they meet with our literacy coach and 2 half days where they're released to meet with our numeracy coach, where they go through all of that data to really look at what is it that their whole class needs and what is it that individual students need to move them on in learning. And we also, of course, do formative assessments along the way, check-ins, and lots of that is intentionally planned, but some of it's just about checking in on the day. The next thing I'll share is our handover data. So our handover data we've done for years, but this particular iteration has been perfected by David Muldoon. I'll give him a shout out. He's now working in town at the moment. What we found from year to year is that we did a really great job of those Wave 3 kids who we know are of concern. We did a great job of handing over to the next teacher through handover conversations. So teachers would be released, the current year teacher and next year's teacher, to do those conversations. But it was sort of what is it that we do for the rest of our kids? So now we have a data profile for every single student. This kind of just shows a part of it. So it talks about what intervention they've had for the current year, what the teacher recommends they should have for the following year, and of course it breaks down all of their data for PAT-M, PAT-R, NAPLAN and that sort of thing. Sitting alongside that, of course, is all of the specialist reports that we have from any therapists or any one plans and ILPs and that sort of thing too. So that's just a bit about how we get to know our students. In terms of supporting our students, we know that differentiated teaching and explicit teaching is, the best way to move forward. And we heard about the waves of intervention, but we do put a lot of emphasis on that Wave 1 and Wave 2 and the quality differentiated teaching practices that we have. But we also have students that, need more, just like all of you. So with our... just popped up here the waves, which you've probably all seen before, and I've kind of deliberately made the Wave 1 bigger because that's where most of our work's done. I thought I'd just share with you, though, a story or two about some of our Wave 3 kids. So we've got a young fellow at the moment who has a Category 9 level of support through IESP, and he initially came to us pretty much non-verbal, a little bit of echolalia, that sort of thing. As we have gotten to know him and built that relationship, he has shared more of himself with us. And it started with one day he started coming to school saying, "Let's make it," or "put it in the pot and get some glue." And he just kept repeating that phrase. And then we were like, here's our in. This is how we can get to know this kid. So we started watching Mr. Maker with him, which is where that's from, in case you don't know. And from there, we've developed a real personalised approach. So we've also learnt that he learns best through song. So now, if we can weave anything into like the Five Little Ducks song, there's so many concepts that we can put in there, he can learn it. So now we learn a lot through song, we learn a lot through routine and repetition. So the number of times I've had to pretend to eat a wooden cookie with him so he can rehearse with me, "Hello Heidi, would you like a cookie?" So he's practicing those things, and sometimes he'll get it mixed up and he'll say, "Heidi, these cookies are delicious." Or the SSO will say, "Ask Heidi if she wants a cookie." He'll go, "Ask Heidi if she wants a cookie." But we're getting there, and it's lots of repetition and whatnot. So we really try that personalised approach. Alina spoke before about Prospect North, and I'd like to give them a shout out too, because they welcomed us for a visit one day. We had another little fellow of ours who's Cat 7. He's ASD, ADHD, he's been suspended multiple times, he's been excluded, and we're kind of at that point of what do we do with this child, because our environment is not catering to his needs, and what can we do differently. So we went and had a look at the nurture room over there at Prospect North, and Christine Fowler, thank you, gave us a great presentation on that. And so we've tried with him a different approach. It's based on nurture. We obviously haven't set up nurture groups yet because we're in the infancy stage, but just the principles of nurture with this one particular student. It's highly scaffolded, highly intensive. Because he does come with that Cat 7 of funding, and what we're trying to do is beyond that, we're actually using our leadership team. So 5 of our leaders work with him a day each in the classroom, and it's been great for us to get to know him and his intricacies, and now we're trying to work on the difficult job of trying to transition him back to the mainstream class environment. But it has been a good stopgap for him so that he can feel more safe and comfortable at school, and also, for his class as well to have that little stop break as well. Wave 2, we've got intervention programs, probably like all of you. We've got big ideas in number, Too Smart, Quick Smart, guided reading, fast phonics, what's the buzz, heavy lifting, reading doctor, you name it, we've probably got it. We do use that TILS assessment I mentioned before to identify specific and individualised programs for students. So we do have a fair number of students who aren't IESP funded who are receiving a Wave 3 level of support just through the individualised approaches that we use. And I have just waited up there. There's so much that happens in Wave 1, and I won't bore you with all of that because it's it's probably stuff that you all do anyway. I just whacked a couple up here for you. Big drive on student agency at our school, and that probably does just come with the cohort of kids. We have a big focus on success criteria and learning intentions. They're really visible in our classrooms. Our students set goals. We use bump it up walls, all that kind of stuff. Does that mean I'm wrapping up? Oh gosh. Okay, skipping on through. I just wanted to quickly mention our transition stuff because I'll just skip all this. We found a couple of years ago that we've got 120 kids, right, that transition to our school each year. And so we employed an enrolment officer, and all of a sudden the leadership was taken out of those initial interactions that you have with families, because we just could not possibly interview that many families. 120 receptions plus all the others that come from 1 to 7. So we re-looked at how we do our transition and how we gather that data, because there was one year where we had it was a hot mess, because we had kids with needs that we did not know about before they came to school. So we started off by looking at how we get information from parents, and we came up with this enrolment questionnaire, which I can share later. But surprise, surprise, not all parents are honest. So we then had to look at how else could we do that. So we actually started what we call our roadshow. So our ELD teacher, junior primary ELD teacher, the reception team leader, myself and our enrolments officer, we actually physically go around to kindergartens and preschools. We've got about 20 now that feed to us. So some of them are phone calls, but if we hear something that might be a flag, we'll go and visit, observe the child. We gather all sorts of anecdotal evidence and data so that we can be better prepared for those kids when they come to school, and make sure that we've got the physical resources as well as the facilities to support them, and have a deeper understanding of what their social and emotional needs are as well. And I'm happy to share that as well via the platform later. And, sorry, just quickly make sure I've kind of covered most of the stuff. Oh, and I just was going to share, I know schools have all got their own version of like a request for support services, but if all of that stuff that we've put in place doesn't work, or if we're not making success or progress, then obviously we have our termly SRTs with our support services, and we try and capture all the stuff about learning and wellbeing in a form like this before we take it to that group. So sorry I had to race at the end there. I could talk all day. Thank you, Angela. So I'll hand over to Kirsty and leave you with it. Thanks.
Thanks. Last speaker on a Friday, week 9, term 2, raining, cold. I thought perhaps you might like to have some practical stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm Kirsty Amos. I'm the principal at Parafield Gardens High School, but I've only been there for 8 months. Before that, I was principal at Moonta Area School for 8 years. Anyway, I probably know more about Moonta than I know about Parafield Gardens, but what I know about both places, they're fabulous places to be with excellent people. But today I want to share some of the things that I've learned in both places. So before I start, I just wanted to thank Sonia Perkins, Jane McCauley, Katie Costa and Daniel Richardson especially from Moonta Area School, and India Lenneth, Danny Labrandy, Annalise Tolner, Carla Pobke and Christine Darcy from Parafield Gardens High School, because a lot of what you're going to hear today is actually not my work, but it's theirs. And I also wanted to thank the IESP team, because as part of SASPA, I was able to be on the panel for 12 months, and the learning that I did at that and the sharing that all of the people in that team did was exceptional. So, as you can see from my slides, they're not anywhere near as polished as others. Technology is not one of my strengths. However, hopefully it will give you an idea. This is what Heidi was talking about. So this is the opposite of Linden Park. But what is quite interesting is that Moonta Area School and Parafield Gardens High School's profile is actually very, very similar. We're both Category 3. I don't know if you can actually see it. there are some differences, and the difference is that Parafield Gardens High School has 44% of EALD learners, and I think Moonta had 2%. I could actually name all 3 students and their parents and any other associated family members. I certainly can't do that for Parafield Gardens High School. Students in both schools face adversity, but it's a really different context. Both schools are Category 3. I would argue that both schools, for different reasons, could perhaps be a Category 2. The demographic, though, is just what we're looking at to give us initial information. I'm also going to be talking about the 1 in 4 strategy. I just wanted to point out, if you go to this link, it will give you access to this PowerPoint. I don't know how many staff have had access to this, and the language of it is really, really important, and it makes a really big difference if people understand it. It talks about quality differentiated teacher practice. It talks about accommodations, adjustments. It talks about supplementation. It talks about all of that language that we've been talking about that's really, really different from when most people started thinking about catering for difference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and if I get time, I do talk a lot, so I'm not sure that I will. I'll talk about the way we use the ISP grant differently. So what are the common challenges? The common challenges, I think, in high school are that the number of educators involved in any one student's education is large. I didn't put this on the slide, but teachers teaching disciplines and teachers' understanding or lack of understanding of actually how to teach English. I know a couple of other people have mentioned that. But it's quite significant. So I too am an English teacher, and I remember back to when I was taught by Gary Costello actually to teach English. But I would write things on students' work that would say things like not specific enough, or question mark, or it wasn't even as specific as this paragraph needs a topic sentence. It was just this didn't make sense. But it really didn't show any understanding of what that child wasn't understanding to be able to produce a piece of work that met the criteria. I know a lot more now. I would never do that now, just saying. But the other thing is that the rate of change, as Lindley pointed out in her presentation, has been exponential. So from 2016 to now, even earlier than that, but anyway, 6 years, almost, huge change. The terminology has changed. The specifics of how to write an application have changed. What we are looking for in terms of the application has changed. We used to just say we want this amount of money to do this, and then we might have got it, we might have done that, we might not have, but now we actually have to identify what it is that the student's need is. We have to identify what the barrier is. We have to write a really specific goal about whatever it is that needs to be achieved, and then we have to think about, before we even apply for the funding, what it is that's going to achieve the change that we're trying to achieve. And that's teachers, not leaders, because if we're doing all the thinking, then we can't possibly expect the people that are trying to do the work to understand when we don't. It's huge. So what are the solutions? So on your table, this is just a summary, but take a breath. Okay. We've done a lot of work with DayMap, because what we know is the more information that people have, the better they are able to support the young people in their care. We have in both sites gone for a staggered professional learning. Some of it's with support services, so support services have trained leaders, leaders have trained leaders, leaders have then trained staff, but in between the training there's application of learning, and getting feedback from ISP team, from support services, so that the leaders are experts before they're trying to support other people to develop the same skills. That all requires time, it requires support, and it requires people to understand that just giving people information doesn't actually mean that they'll be able to process it and use it. I don't actually have this, but while I've been listening today, there are a couple of other things that have been really important at Parafield Gardens High School, and that is the community links. So this is quite new work, but on a Tuesday afternoon, once a fortnight, we have a group of Afghani mothers that come in and use the, they use the AB Ed space, but they look at our DayMap systems. They have things explained to them. They have Fariba, the community liaison officer, come in and they ask her questions. We answer the question, she tells them what the answer is. And that has led to 3 parents learning English with a community volunteer so that their English skills are coming up. So early days, but quite exciting. Right, you actually have this on your table. This is what I almost said before. This is just a snapshot of data. This is every single class at Parafield Gardens High School has this information readily available for any teacher. So you can see half or maybe some of the first names. Hopefully you can't identify anybody, but you can see on the right, the smaller one, that's Year 8 class. So it doesn't have as much data as the Year 10 class. So what we're trying to show is a snapshot of learning over time. It's colour-coded. What you can see down the bottom, you also have this on your table because coming from Moonta with 3 students English EALD to Parafield Gardens 44%, I wasn't actually that familiar with LEAP levels and I certainly didn't know what they meant. All right. There are some staff at Parafield Gardens who did know what LEAP levels were, but they didn't have the context of what it meant in terms of their teaching. This is the start of our journey, but this has been provided with people. The department has recently put together a whole heap of resources, EALD students, high expectations and appropriate support. We're going to be doing a whole heap of training in term 3 for everyone, right? Because what used to happen is that the EALD learners learnt EALD instead of learning English. Yep. What that meant is that they learnt English in EALD, but then they went to maths, science, tech, art, and they had to learn just like everybody else. And teachers had to understand how to teach that specific cohort of learners, but they really hadn't been supported that well. The people in the school that were EALD teachers were absolutely doing their best to support, but there were like 2 of them and 100 teachers. That resource doesn't go very far. So the model of learning that I want to talk to you about, we're going to apply in lots of different ways, but we are just starting the EALD journey. I might, if you've got any questions about that later, because I'm not sure what I've said and what I haven't. This staggered professional learning for leaders is really, really important. So this at Moonta, what we did is that we got the Students with Additional Needs coordinator to attend the statewide training day. That person then came back and did some initial brain theory. So she gave us information, but she was not yet an expert. So then we got the implementation officer to come down and talk to us about One Plans. It was only a 2-hour training session, but again, there was a lot of information and the connections between Australian curriculum and the One Plans and individual students and literacy and numeracy progressions and literacy and numeracy, social, emotional, the level of information that was required was intense. So we needed that extra support. So what we did then is that the SWAN leader, who'd had 2 sets of training now, was released, and each leader came out of classes to spend at least a double lesson, sometimes half a day, one-on-one with that person, and then they wrote one plans and sometimes ISP applications with a student that they taught and knew well, so that they had a much deeper understanding of what was expected. In week 6, there was another 1-hour refresher course, if you like, for leaders. And then what we did, and this is the part that I think is really quite difficult in secondary, but we released small teams of teachers to work with the leaders that had had the training, because they know the young people best. Yep. What I've come across in a number of sites that I've worked in is that there is one person that is writing one plans. It might be a year level coordinator, or it might be a special needs coordinator. In some sites it might even be a trained person, an SSO. They write the plans and then other people access the plans. Right? I think we need to turn that on our head, and that's what we did at Moonta, where it's difficult though. So it was the home group teacher who was also either the math, science or the English HAS teacher. And those 3 people plus a leader wrote the plans for the students in that home group. It wasn't ideal because there were still other teachers that were contributing to that person's education, but it was better than a person that was trying to know a young person from a piece of paper or a set of data. If the young person had a social and emotional need, we also invited somebody to be part of that construction that knew them in that context. It was usually the health PE teacher, but not always. So another thing that you've got on your table are the big A3 sheets. One is a proposed timetable and one is an ISP barrier sheet. That is the result of Parafield Gardens High School first toe in the water of a team effort. So we're not at the stage that Moonta was yet, but all of the learning community managers and the student wellbeing AP and the student with additional needs AP have all done this work together. And now lots of people are writing these plans with information from teachers who are working with the young person, and we hope that that translates to a more authentic and all-rounded way of going about things, and we hope that that young person gets what they need. It's certainly not easy. Moving right along within my next 15 seconds. Oh, but I've forgotten to do that. Right, that's what you were meant to be looking for on your tables. And I'll go really quickly. But as a result of the ISP application and one plan writing as a team, we were able to identify common needs of students. So even though students are individuals, there were obviously some times where different students needed the same interventions for different reasons. So the ones that I wanted to talk about were the Kenneth Nathan programs, Managing the Ball, Rage, Mentoring, Chillax, Feeling Fantastic, Rules in Relationships. You have a flyer on your table. I did ask his permission. I just copied and pasted it off the web. You can find it yourself if you like. It's been really successful. They are small group work, but it's all about social emotional learning, and it's specific to high schools and high school aged people. The Northern York has done quite a lot of work in this area. Interoception is quite interesting for secondary people. It's really interesting to know that there are a number of adults who cannot feel when they're about to explode. So as a staff at Moonta, we all did our own 5-point scale. And it was really interesting to note that people actually found that helpful, because they knew that if somebody was pressing their buttons, they had identified before they got angry what it is that they needed to do. Adolescents aren't as good at thinking, and sometimes we need to do the thinking for them, but that 5-point scale was incredibly useful, and that leads on to the 5 against the law. The 5 against the law was designed for students on the spectrum, but I've found it useful for all young people that are taking risks and behaving in ways that are going to get them into trouble. Going back to rules in relationships, it's quite contextual. I know that we paid our respects to Sez earlier because she is managing some really, really difficult things. The rules in relationships anywhere, it talks about how to be a good partner. It talks about how to be in a relationship safely. It talks about respect. It's only an 8-week program. It's certainly not going to change the world, but it makes it really explicit what is acceptable and what isn't, and it gives young people skills to say no. It gives people skills to identify if they are behaving respectfully or not. Right. I'm going to... Do you mind if I go for another 2 minutes? Okay. So I just... this is quite important because what we struggled with in a secondary school was that training that people have been talking about all day. We used some of our ISP training to train SSOs and teachers in week 9 of term 4, but also in week 0. So we used that funding to make sure that our SSOs, so we've identified all of the programs now that we think are going to be commonly useful for our secondary students, but we don't have the SSOs trained or the teachers trained to deliver that training. So there are 2 things that were pivotal in making this successful. One, every single training that we delivered, we made sure that there was a leader at that training, at least one. The second thing that we did is that we made sure that there were multiple SSOs trained in all of the trainings so that we didn't make any one student dependent on one person in the site, but also that it was not dependent on the timetable. So, for example, we have specialist soccer and specialist dance at Parryfield Gardens High School. If I only had one SSO trained in what this young woman needed, and it just happened that they were free while she had specialist dance, there is no way she would want to come out and do that learning while she had specialist dance. She would choose that every time. There's no way a year 10 boy that is playing for Adelaide United is going to come out and do literacy instead of specialist soccer. It's just not going to happen. So what we did is we made sure... okay. I don't know why I haven't got that slide in. Anyway, all of the SSOs were trained in multiple things, so it didn't matter when it matched the child. So we matched the SSO with the skill with the child when they needed it. Okay, I'm done. Thanks. See ya.